Alexander Hargrave, the successful billionaire who made his fortune through sheer hard work, had always lived with a secret. Despite his wealth, he couldn't shake the feeling that people only loved him for his money. His childhood was a far cry from the luxury he now enjoyed. Growing up in a modest home, he had experienced the sting of rejection when he didn't have anything to offer. That pain stayed with him. And now, at the height of his success, he feared that everyone who came into his life only saw him as a means to an end. His fiancée, Natalie, had been by his side for nearly 2 years. She was beautiful, kind-hearted, and always seemed to put him first. But lately, Alexander's doubts had started creeping in. Was she truly in love with him? Or was it just the allure of his wealth? The thought nagged at him, keeping him awake at night. Her love felt genuine. But was it? Or was she just like everyone else who had come into his life, interested in his money and status? One evening, as the sun set behind the sprawling mansion, Alexander sat on the balcony, staring out at the skyline. He made up his mind. He would test her, not to hurt her, but to find out if she loved him for who he truly was. He wasn't sure how, but he had a plan. A strange idea popped into his mind. What if he could disappear, leave everything behind, and see if she would still love him when he was no longer the billionaire? He decided to put his plan into motion the very next day. In the dead of night, he created a fake email, one that would sound urgent and convincing. He told Natalie he had lost everything. His fortune, his assets, everything. He even told her he was bankrupt and had to move into a small apartment on the other side of town. When she read the email, her face was a mask of shock. But there was something more in her eyes. A flicker of doubt. Was this real? Was he being truthful? It didn't take long for her to reply, her words filled with concern and confusion. I don't care about the money, Alexander. I care about you. He knew she had to be tested. But how far would she go? That night he called her up, his heart racing. I'm sorry, but I think it's best if we break up. I don't want to drag you down with me. He braced himself for her response. But what happened next shocked him. Natalie didn't beg, didn't plead. She said, If you truly love me, then you'll know that nothing could make me leave you. Her voice was calm, almost too calm. And that's when Alexander's doubts began to creep back in. Was this real? Was she just saying the right things because she knew he wanted to hear them? Meanwhile, Natalie was feeling something else entirely. Deep down, she was suspicious. She had always suspected that Alexander was hiding something. He had been distant lately, almost as if he was trying to push her away. She wondered if it had something to do with his wealth, or if there was a secret he was keeping from her. Her heart ached, but she also knew something had to change. And so, Natalie made a decision of her own. She was going to test him. She didn't tell anyone, not even her best friend, about her plan. She would disguise herself as a stranger, someone completely different, and see how he reacted. Would he still be interested in her? Or would his affections change when he thought she was just an ordinary woman? Natalie's plan was set into motion. The next day, she dressed in simple, unassuming clothes, her hair tied up in a messy bun. She walked into the same cafe Alexander frequented, sitting at a corner table. She watched him from afar as he arrived, oblivious to the fact that the woman he had been talking to for years was sitting just a few feet away, watching him closely. Alexander walked in, looking distracted, lost in thought. As he passed by her table, their eyes met, and he smiled politely. But there was something about the way he looked at her. Something cold. Almost as if she were just another stranger in his life. She couldn't help but feel a pang of hurt. This was the man she loved, but he didn't recognize her. Not at all. She had expected to feel nervous, unsure of herself. But instead she felt empowered. She wanted to see if he would approach her, if he would recognize the woman who had been by his side for so long. But he didn't. Alexander continued walking, lost in his own world. A few minutes later, a waitress came over to take his order, and it was then that Natalie decided it was time to confront him. As Alexander took a seat at his usual table, Natalie stood up and made her way over. He looked up in surprise as if he hadn't expected to see her there. "Excuse me," she said, her voice low but firm. "Do you mind if I sit here?" Alexander blinked, confused for a moment. "Oh, sure. But don't I know you from somewhere?" Natalie smiled softly. "You might. I've been around. I'm just not the person you think I am." The words hung in the air, thick with tension. For a brief moment, Alexander's gaze flickered with recognition, but only for a split second before he looked away. The uncertainty was unmistakable, and that's when Natalie knew her suspicions were right. He had no idea who she was anymore. The plan had worked. The silence between them stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Alexander cleared his throat, his mind racing. He was unsure what to make of the situation. "I'm sorry, I just thought..." His voice trailed off as he looked her over, his brow furrowed. "You remind me of someone. But I must be mistaken." Natalie's heart was pounding in her chest. She had expected a reaction, maybe surprise, even confusion. But not this. This cold distance, this unfamiliarity, was a bitter pill to swallow. It felt like a slap in the face. The man she had loved, the one who promised they would face everything together, didn't even recognize her anymore. She tried to mask the hurt she was feeling, keeping her face neutral as she sat down across from him. "Well, I'm just an ordinary woman. Nothing special, really." For a moment, Alexander hesitated, his eyes scanning her face as if trying to unlock a secret he had once known. But then, his attention shifted, and he turned to his phone, dismissing her presence. "I apologize, I'm just going through some stuff right now. I'm not really in the mood for a chat." The indifference in his tone stung more than anything. Natalie had expected a reaction, but this was a confirmation of everything she feared. Alexander had become so absorbed in his own world, his own worries, that he didn't even recognize her anymore. The woman he claimed to love, the woman who had stood by him through everything, had become a stranger. Just as she was about to leave, a voice interrupted her thoughts. "Wait," he said, looking up from his phone. His gaze was softer now, searching. "Are you sure we've never met before?" Natalie smiled, her heart heavy. "Oh, I'm sure," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm just someone passing through." Alexander nodded, and there was a moment of awkward silence before he stood up and walked away without a second glance. The encounter left Natalie reeling, and for a brief moment, she almost wished she had never started this test. But then, she reminded herself why she had done it. To find out if the man she loved would still care for her when everything else was stripped away. She watched him disappear out the door, her emotions a mixture of betrayal and clarity. But just as she was about to leave herself, a figure stepped in front of her, blocking her path. It was Mark, Alexander's childhood friend. Mark had always been there for him, even before the money, before the fame. But today, something about him felt different. There was a tension in the air, a hidden agenda. Mark studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing. "Is that really you?" he asked, voice low and cautious. "What game are you playing with him, Natalie?" Taken aback, Natalie stared at Mark, trying to make sense of what he was implying. What do you mean? I'm just here. Mark cut her off. No, I know you've been testing him, and I know why you're doing it. You think he's hiding something, don't you? Natalie's eyes widened. What are you talking about? Mark's expression softened slightly, as if he was weighing the truth in his mind. You're not the only one testing someone here, Natalie. Alexander has been testing you too. He's been hiding his true self from you for months now. He didn't lose everything. It's all a lie. Her heart skipped a beat. What? You're saying he's been faking everything? Mark nodded, his tone serious. He didn't want you to love him for his money. He wanted to know if you could love him without it. But he's been struggling with this, keeping you at arm's length because he doesn't want to get hurt again. He's been pushing you away on purpose. Natalie felt a lump form in her throat. The weight of the truth hit her hard. She had suspected something was off. But this was a revelation. Alexander had been testing her just as much as she had been testing him. Her mind raced, trying to piece everything together. The sudden distance, the coldness, the way he had pushed her away. It all made sense now. But what could she do with this newfound knowledge? Should she confront him, reveal that she knew the truth? Or should she let him continue with his plan, knowing that it was all part of a twisted game? Before she could decide, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Alexander. I need to see you. Meet me at the park. There's something I need to tell you. Natalie felt her heart race. This was it. The moment where everything would come to a head. She knew this was going to change everything. The question swirled in her mind. Would she confront him about his lies? Or would she play along and see where this twisted game led them? She stood up, taking a deep breath, and walked toward the park. As she approached the familiar spot they always met, she saw Alexander standing there, his back to her. The tension in the air was thick with unspoken words. When he turned around, his eyes met hers, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he looked vulnerable. Natalie, he said softly, I've been so scared. Scared that you wouldn't love me if you knew the truth. Her heart skipped a beat. She stepped closer, her voice barely a whisper. And what truth is that, Alexander? He took a deep breath and finally confessed, I never lost everything. I did all of this to see if you loved me for who I am, not for what I have. Natalie was silent for a moment, letting his words sink in. Then she smiled, a smile filled with relief and understanding. And you don't have to worry anymore, Alexander. I love you, not your money. I always have. The truth was out, and for the first time in their relationship, they both understood each other completely. The games, the tests, the fear, they were all behind them now. What remained was pure, honest love, something stronger than any wealth or disguise. And as they walked away together, hand in hand, they both knew one thing for sure. Love, true love, couldn't be tested. It was something that simply had to be trusted.